Damp wart. What does it mean? No, it's not some soggy dermatological condition. It's an acronym. And in fact, it's a mnemonic of 8 different strategies that can make your learning in medical school fun and more effective. So, what are they? D is for drawing. A is for active learning and recall. M is for mnemonics, just like damp wart. P is for pegging, which is a type of mnemonic. W is for word roots, looking up those word roots so you know what they are. The other A is for activities, like one that we would do in the live sessions, the Play-Doh activity. I'll talk about that. Repetition, like using Anki and Quizlet, but repetition, and specifically spaced repetition, is really useful. And T for teaching. So let's go through each one briefly. Drawing. This is really good for anatomy, but can also be useful for other classes. When you're going to learn a structure like the heart, and especially when there's vasculature involved, really useful to draw it out. Jill talks about a program called Draw to Know It, so definitely talk to her about that. There have been students who have found immense help in anatomy using Draw to Know It. This picture on the right is a picture of the heart and the vessels of the heart. This was in SEM on one of the whiteboards that a student drew. Active learning and recall, we have a whole video on it. Basically, instead of just reading the information or highlighting it or watching a video, see what you remember. Write it out, draw it out, talk it out, see what's in your memory, what you can actually access. Because if you just read the material, you may think you know it, but you might not. If you actively bring the material out of your brain, you know what you have access to. And the way that I like to do it is, let's say I'm drawing out a one sheet. I will draw out the one sheet from memory without looking at it, and then look at the one sheet, see what I got right, see what I got wrong, and see what I left out. The things I got wrong and that I left out, those I'll even put onto the one sheet I just drawn out in a different color, and that in a way to tell my brain, okay, this is what you forgot last time. Really try to remember this for next time. M is for mnemonics. These are really good memorization tools. I recommend not to over rely on strictly memorization tools. You do want to understand things. If you understand the material, you will remember it for longer. But sometimes you just have to get that information in, and mnemonics can be useful. So for the cranial nerves, you're going to want to know whether they transmit sensory information, motor information, or both. And there are 2 mnemonics. So one mnemonic is for the names. O, to touch and feel very good, velvet such heaven. Maybe easy to remember, maybe not. There are others that are different than that. I have some issues with this particular mnemonic, because you can see that the first 3 are O's. Well, how do you know which O it is? The next strategy we talk about will help take care of this issue. Same thing with the T's. There's 2 different T's. How do you know which is first? Let's look at the other mnemonic, the function mnemonic, whether it's sensory, motor, or both. That mnemonic is, one of the versions is, some say marry money, but my brother says big brains matter more. Sometimes it's not brains, it could be a different B word. But anything with an S is sensory, anything with a M is motor, anything with a B is both. Now, one of the issues with this mnemonic is if you want to get to the 10th nerve, you have to know the other 9. You have to go through those first. So some say marry money, but my brother says big brains. Okay, B is both. So for these longer lists, this is a list of 12, it gets a little less efficient when you are talking about the later cranial nerves, because you have to go through the first however many to get there. If we compare this with pegging, it's a mnemonic tool. This is where you can memorize ordered lists, and you can recall number 7 without going through the first 6 like the previous mnemonic. And the way this works is you start with words which are objects that can be visualized. It's important that you can visualize them, that they are actual objects and not abstract terms. Because what you're going to do is you're going to connect and anchor information about the cranial nerve to that image. So let's look at these images, and each one is going to rhyme with the number, and that's what makes it memorable. 1 bun, 2 shoe, 3 tree, 4 door, etc. So how you would use this, how I used it to learn the cranial nerves is, so for 1 is bun, and the cranial nerve 1 is olfactory. So what I picture is I picture a bun on a plate within a crib, because the olfactory nerve goes through the cribriform plate, and that bun has a giant nose on it. And it's on this conveyor belt in a factory, and there's flames and smoke everywhere because it's an old factory. So we have olfactory, it's smell because of the nose, it's on a bun. Bun is 1, and it's also on a plate in a cribriform plate. It seems a little silly probably, and it is a little silly, but the idea is you're using your visual memory, you are anchoring to something that is very easy to remember, 1 bun, and you're using those visuals to embed information. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. So if you can create a picture that has that information embedded in it, it's going to be easier to remember. And again, the good thing about pegging is you can jump right to the number, 10 hen. Picture the hen, and then you have your information about the vagus nerve. It does take, obviously, forethought and some work to get this in place. And if you're going to draw it all out, that takes even more work. I drew 1 or 2, but for the others, I more described it and pictured it in my mind. So it is an investment up front, but much easier to study, much easier to review, because all you do is just look or think of the picture, and you've just studied and recalled that information. So it is more time and energy intensive up front, but later on, you're going to recall it much better. W is word roots. I highly recommend when you are looking at terms to break them apart into their roots. For example, bradycardia. Brady means slow, cardia is the heartbeat, so it's a slow heartbeat. The benefit of this is that brady is used in other terms, like bradypnea. Apnea is breathing, brady is slow, so that's slowed breathing. When you learn the word roots in isolation, then you can put them together in different ways to get different words. If you know the word roots, you can be introduced to a word you've never seen, but if you are familiar with the individual roots, then you can define it without looking it up. And that's an example of knowing something without knowing it. You figure it out because of other contexts that you understand. That, I think, is a really good place to be, because you don't want to have to memorize everything. You want to be able to figure things out, because there's only so much that any of us can know. But if we have that deeper understanding with that, we can figure it out on the fly. Really useful. Activities. I'm also kinesthetic. I think we all have some elements. People tend to be quite visual. Kinesthetic is also useful. Auditory, some people are much more auditory than others. But I do think that activities that require you to use what you know and put it into action, it's going to use a different part of the brain and help you learn it beyond what you can get just from reading, writing, watching, or even some other activities like drawing could be really good, but you can you can actually take it a step further. Let's talk about the Play-Doh activity. Play-Doh activity was inspired by something that I did when I was a student. It was year 3 or 4. I had been very active giving adjustments. I was very active in the anatomy lab. I was the anatomy TA. I was a tutor. I knew the material very well. I had been shadowing for an orthopedic surgeon and a pain management doctor. And I had been studying orthopedics for pretty intensely for months at the very least. So I thought I knew the material well. And then I challenged myself. I had some Play-Doh, and I thought, let me see if I can make a scapula out of Play-Doh. And when I did it, I was really challenged. I started to think, okay, where is that acromion? Where does it come from? Is it on this side or that side? And how far does it go out? And a lot of questions started to come that I never asked before because I had never been challenged to create the scapula in 3 dimensions. That challenge, it made me look at the scapula differently from then on out. I started to see different details in the scapula, see different qualities, and I could see it more holistically because when you study the bones, you're going to study all the individual landmarks, but to create it from Play-Doh, I had to see how they all fit together. So that was a great activity to help me learn the scapula, and it can be used for other bones too. If you can make a bone and put on all the landmarks that you need to learn and that you're responsible for, well, then you must know it pretty well if you can do that. So you can make the bone and then make and also talk it out while you're doing it. You could be with someone or not. Talk out what those different landmarks are doing, whether they're attachment points or whatnot. But there are all sorts of activities you can do. Get creative, have fun, see it as a learning opportunity. Sometimes you have more time and energy than others, so it's not something they have to do all the time. But if you feel the inspiration and you feel creative, go for it. Learning should be fun. Another thing that I did when I was learning a lot about orthopedics, I thought, well, let me look at these joints a little bit differently, because I've been studying these joints from the anatomical point of view, from the orthopedic point of view, looking at all the ligaments, all the tendons, all the joint structures, how to test them when there's damage or pain, what are the symptoms, what are the treatments. But I thought, well, let me look at it differently, because I do work with the joints in a different way, and that's with Chinese medicine and with acupuncture. So I took those two fields and I brought them together. I took the structures of the joints, the anatomical structures, and then I looked at what acupuncture points are in the region and what do they do. And then I looked for patterns. I discovered, first of all, a lot of acupuncture points are near these important structures that can be damaged and that are often injected into with treatments like prolo treatments. So the Chinese medicine acupuncture points did have a correlation with the anatomical structures. Another thing I found was that when I looked at those different joints and I looked at the points around them and saw what they were doing in general, I saw some patterns. The elbow, a lot of heat reducing points. The wrist, you have some calming points. Shoulder, you have some phlegm reducing points. So now, because of that, I see this material in a different way. And so when I'm thinking shoulder issues, I'm also thinking about Chinese medicine phlegm. It was also a fun activity. I'm not going to lie. I've done other activities that were enjoyable. I use activities not only to study the information, but also to learn skills. When it came to acupuncture, my skills were pretty bad at first. I was surprised how far off you can miss the point when you're needling it. The first point was that we practiced was in the web between the thumb and the first finger. And there isn't much space there, but I was about as far from that point as you can be. So I practiced the skills. I got some acupuncture needles. I got an orange, and I just started practicing needling. And I would put on a show and watch it, and then just needle this thing over and over again until I got the handle of what it felt like. I eventually progressed to a potato because it felt like better consistency. And then I was aiming for the eyes on the potato. And I needled this potato hundreds, if not thousands of times. Helped me with my skills. So do activities. Think of some fun ways to either learn the information, maybe understand it on a different level, or practice your skills. Repetition is really important. Neurons that fire together wire together. You do want to repeat the information, see it over and over again. Eventually it's just going to be in you and you won't have to study it or memorize it. You'll just have that knowing, but it takes time. It takes a lot of time, and it's not just about the spaced repetition. It's about the other things that we're discussing in Natural Advantage as well. And lastly, teaching or testing. If you don't know it, One of the best ways to learn it is to teach it. And you may think you're not ready or that you can't until you learn it, but in my experience, sometimes that is the way to learn it, is to try to teach it. It's good practice to challenge your brain. We actually learn more when we challenge ourselves versus when we're going easy. If it's too easy, we're not going to learn as much. It's like going to the gym. If you're not working out that hard, if your workout is too easy, you're not going to see the results with your muscles and with your fitness. Same thing with the brain. It is good to challenge your brain in a way that's going to encourage it to grow and to learn. It's going to be more effective. So challenging yourself to teach or to answer questions, practice questions, is going to help you understand and learn the material better. I will say, as a student, I noticed, and I'm pretty sure it wasn't just me, but there were a lot of times, especially for certain teachers, where I'd study the material and feel like I knew it, but then when I took the tests, the way the questions were asked, the way they were framed, whatever it was, I had a hard time solving and answering the questions. And I'm big on practicing the way the game is going to be. So practice game time scenarios. If the game time scenario and what you're preparing for is a test, then practice by answering test questions. You can answer questions that you made, like on Quizlet. You can answer questions that other students made. Some students would form groups, and each person would be responsible to make test questions for a different lecture. Some people, they made all the questions, and then the other people in the group, they did other things. Or you can answer questions that are in BRS books, that are in USMLE book. You have access to question banks through SCNM. Talk to Robert at the library, or anyone else that's working there. They can help you with that. So give teaching and testing a try. This is a really good one. Actually, I think this is one of the more important ones that I think some students are doing a lot of and reaping the benefits. Some aren't doing enough of. So talk it out, teach it out, try to explain it, even if you're not talking to anyone. And answer questions. They could be your own, there could be someone else's, or they could be from a book. So that's Damp WART. A quick mnemonic on some study strategies that can help you as a student. They can make your studying smarter, not harder. Remember, D is drawing, A is active recall, M is mnemonics, P is pegging, which is a type of mnemonic, W is word roots, A was... what was A? A was something else. Here, let's look at it. Activities. Have fun. Do some activities. R is repetition, and T is testing. So try it out. Damp WART.